How are you doing as a caregiver with asking for help if your loved one is living with dementia or another long term health issue? You're going to need plenty of support. Yet, so many caregivers feel overwhelmed, exhausted, and angry because they're not getting the support they feel they need and deserve. How to ask for and say yes to help is up next on Still Time for Joy, where we share practical advice for weathering life's storms and inspiring stories of resilience. Hello, I'm Sandra Levine, host of Still Time for Joy. My guest once again is Deb Hallisey, a caregiver advocate and certified dementia practitioner. Welcome to the show, Deb.
Thanks, Sandra. It's great to be back with you and your listeners.
So this is a hot button issue, asking for help, saying yes to help when it's offered. In your work as a caregiver advocate and working with families, how often does this come up?
Every single time. And oftentimes it's wrapped around those unspoken expectations we have of other family members and assuming or thinking that they're just going to either offer help or that they're going to give it to you in the way that you need it.
Why is it so hard for some caregivers to ask for help? And then even when they get an offer of help, it's sometimes hard to accept it.
I think there are several things that play into that. One of which is we believe we are the person that must be providing the care, right? Like you don't even think about the fact that you don't have to do everything. You're so oftentimes in that task orientation that you don't even take a step back and say, someone else can be doing this for me. And then oftentimes it's an issue of privacy, right? Or embarrassment. Either the person, for example, the person with dementia sometimes doesn't want anybody to know they have it, so asking for help may bring that up. Or it's a question of privacy. My mom resisted getting help from our neighbor to pick up things from the grocery store in between the times I was with her. And I finally got to the reason why, and that is when she went to pay her, she wouldn't take any money. And for my mom, that was a source of pride. And so the solution came from my aunt, who said, just buy a gift card to whatever store you're asking them to go to. Keep a tally of what they've spent. And when it's done, we're almost done, give them another gift card. And that completely solved that issue. A lot of times it's birth order, right? Like if you are the oldest person, you are used to being the one giving help, so you don't often ask for help. The youngest person can feel like no one listens to them, so why even bother? And then gender. More and more there are male caregivers, and so often they see asking for help as a weakness.
And as far as siblings, is it often one sibling who takes on the majority of the caregiving role?
Oh, 100%. 100%. And that gets oftentimes back to birth order and gender. The women, 99% of the time, even if it's a mother-in-law, become the primary caregiver. The role that they had in the family, if they were the peacemaker and the family pleaser, they oftentimes takes on the role. Sometimes it is simply a matter of who is the closest, right? But what also plays into that is the relationship. Like if you had a strained relationship with a person who needs care, you probably won't and are not the best person to do it. So then it will fall on another sibling as well. I have seen really wonderful instances where siblings work together beautifully, each taking a piece of the role. Their family relationship was strong from the very beginning, but there is always one primary caregiver who oversees everything and takes the ultimate responsibility.
Yes, of course, there are health issues that need to be dealt with, doctor appointments. There are legal issues that need to be dealt with. There are chores that need to be dealt with, the financial stuff that needs to be dealt with. So ideally, if you have several siblings or several people that are close to your loved one, you can split those things up to some degree. But how often does that actually happen?
Um, Maybe 70-30, the 70% not happening, to be honest with you. And I think the other thing that we haven't talked about is, yes, there's the physical tasks, but I think the harder part is the emotions around feeling like either you have to ask and they're not just stepping up, or they question everything and don't do things the way you do. I mean, I have story after story of people who come in to help so you get respite and they completely change the system that you're working with, which isn't helpful at all.
Yes, sure. So, what are some good tips to keep in mind if you're about to ask for help?
First thing is be ready with a list, right? Absolutely be ready with a list, because in the headspace of caregiving with all the things you have to do, especially in a crisis, it is very difficult to think that through in a way that makes sense. And when you're not emotional, to ask for the help as well. And we're going to talk about a really specific way that I've learned to do that that's very, very helpful. But the interesting thing about even in the ask for help is it's oftentimes not even the task you need help with, but it's the emotions around that with your siblings. Like, why don't they just step up? Why don't they do it the way I asked them to? Why do they push back about everything? So, like with everything in caregiving, it's the emotional undertones that are often the hardest.
So, now we're going to get to some specific techniques to make asking for help easier and more effective. And it's called the SMART method. It's a concept attributed to a management consultant named George Doran in the early 1980s. So, let's go over the SMART acronym one concept at a time.
Sure, sure. And I will just tell you, in my previous life, when I did corporate training, I had to use these to write objectives for training class. So that's where it comes from. So the S stands for specific, okay? And you want, when you write them down, to make sure whatever tasks you have are specific and time bound. And the M stands for measurable, like, do you know it has been completed? The A stands for assignable. Are you choosing the right person to actually do that task? The R stands for realistic. I mean, sometimes we ask someone to do something, and it's simply not their strength, and they might do it, but neither one of you are happy with the outcome with it. You know, we have unrealistic expectations oftentimes about skill level or willingness to actually do something for you. And particularly with siblings, that can kind of get you into trouble. What I really tell people when we're talking about realistic is you want to play to people's comfort levels. So I'll tell you a story about my cousin. When my dad was in the hospital in 2014 for 2 weeks, my cousin, love her to death, called and said, "What can I do to help?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, if you would go to the hospital and be with my dad over lunchtime, I can come home, get mom up, get her dressed, do everything what I need to do," right? And she went, "Okay." And I went, active listening. That was not a, "Oh, okay, sure." And I said, "Sue, you don't sound like you're thrilled about that. What is going on?" And she said, "Well, the truth of the matter is, since my dad was in the hospital with cancer, I'm not comfortable in hospitals." "Not a problem. Do me a favor. Come and stay with mom. I will go back to the hospital. What would be really helpful to me is she's got this one drawer in the kitchen she wants to clean out, and I haven't gotten to it. If you could give her lunch and clean out that drawer, that would be a huge help." So when you're asking, really listen to what their response is, because you may think you have the right person, but indeed, there may be something that makes them not right that you don't know about. That's particularly true with your siblings. And finally, the T is time bound. Okay. You know, what I always tell people is you can say, "Oh, can you walk the dog?" And they'll say, "Sure." Right. When in reality, you should be saying, "Can you walk the dog Tuesday and Thursday this week between 5 and 7 for 20 minutes so I can go directly to the hospital for work?"
Very different way of asking than just saying, "Can you walk the dog?" And it never happens, right?
Oh, 100%, 100%. If you don't have it specific and they just say yes, maybe Tuesday doesn't work for them and they can do 6 to 8, but not 5 to 7, right? And we're saying for 20 minutes, but in their head, they're thinking it's a 10-minute drive to your house, a 20-minute walk, a 10-minute drive back, which is really a half hour to 40 minutes. Can I do it? So when you make it specific, smart, you have the room to negotiate. They can either say no, or you can say, "Okay, no problem, do this day, or we can adjust the hours," or whatever it is. I think one of the mistakes we make sometimes is we'll maybe make a doctor's appointment, right? And we're bound into that time, and that's a good thing. But before you make that appointment, you would probably better off saying to the person who you're asking, can you take mom or dad to the doctor's this day between this time for this appointment? And if they say no, you have the room to say, well, does the hour not work for you? Does the day not work for you? Till you get to a time and a date that works for both of you, and then make the appointment. You avoid all the frustration of going, oh, once again, I asked something and they're not going to help me. Maybe they've got something going on, right?
Sure.
And you don't know about it.
So this is a good way to get some of the help that you're looking for. Let's go over it once more. Make it specific, so you're naming exactly what you need help with. Make it measurable, so everybody understands what kind of commitment they're making. What are they trying to accomplish? What are you asking them to accomplish? Assignable, picking a person, naming the exact person. Making it realistic means picking the right person, so it's something their skill levels match with. And then finally, time related, saying exactly when you need this done and how long the task will take. Well, that should all help. So what else can caregivers do to make it more likely that they're going to get help from not just siblings, but other loved ones, from neighbors, from friends? What else do caregivers need to do?
Well, I think one of the hardest things, I'll go back to what we said earlier, which is we think we need to be the person that's doing it. But also, I think particularly as women, okay, we think things should be done in a certain way. And a question I always ask is the way the other person is going to do it harmful and truly wrong? Or is it just different than the way you would do it? Because just different is perfectly fine. If it's not causing harm, not causing distress, not causing you extra work, just because they do it differently doesn't mean it's wrong.
And it's okay for your loved one it's better for your loved one to actually interact with other people, not just one person. So, as we've said other times on the show, it does take a village, but you have to be willing to let other people into the circle to offer and provide help. Deb Hallisey, caregiver advocate and certified dementia practitioner. You gave us some wonderful tips for asking for and saying yes to help. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, great to see you again, Sandra. You take care.
If you found today's show helpful, please share the information with someone who needs it and follow Still Time for Joy for more practical tips on weathering life's storms, as well as inspiring stories of people who have turned their pain into purpose. Please consider supporting the work that goes into producing the show on Patreon. Follow Sandra Levine Productions on Facebook and YouTube, and learn more at sandralevine.com.